They don't know it's where I've been and who I am, all the ways I've grown.
This isn't self-help, it's a full-on rebirth. Welcome to Girl Wake Up, the podcast for women who are done playing small, staying silent, or living by rules they never wrote. I'm Amy Polacco, journalist, divorce and life coach, and freedom warrior, and I'm here to help you take your power back. Because the system isn't going to save us. We need to save ourselves. So grab your coffee, your courage, and maybe a few curse words. It's time to wake up. Welcome to Girl Wake Up, everybody. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on divorce from an attorney's perspective. We're getting an inside look at family court from someone who spent nearly 40 years inside on the other side of the conference table. My guest, Ron Bavero, is a former family law attorney who has seen firsthand what happens behind the scenes when marriages end, what clients get wrong, what lawyers notice, how cases spiral out of control, and what people wish they knew sooner. So welcome, Ron, to Girl Wake Up.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thank you for having me.
So I want to tell everybody a little bit more about you because you have quite a resume. I mean, you've practiced law for almost 4 decades. You've handled complex divorce cases, and I know you've told me some that have gone well into the millions. In New York's trial and appellate courts. You're a fellow of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. You've taught matrimonial law at Pace University School of Law and served in leadership roles with New York State and Westchester County. For anyone who doesn't live in the New York area, that's just north of the city. So you're active in their bar associations. And he is the author of this book. I love the cover and the title, An Elephant Doesn't Marry a Giraffe, Everything I Learned as a Divorce Attorney, which draws on his experience, which we're going to tap into today, Ron, because for all of you ladies listening, when do you get, free advice from an attorney? Okay, I'm not knocking attorneys, Ron, but we're going to take advantage of this today. After 40 years in family law, what do you think you know about divorce now that you didn't know when you started?
So before I entered the world of divorce, I was actually a prosecutor in the district attorney's office, so mainly in the field of criminal law. And I guess one of the things that really surprised me when I became involved in family law was the extreme range of emotions that I saw now in my family law cases that I didn't even experience in the criminal law phase of the cases. We like to talk about the fact that criminal law clients are bad people on their best behavior, whereas the divorce clients are good people on their worst behavior. So seeing some of the really strange, wacky, insane things that people were doing in their divorce cases really came as a shock to me almost, because I kept having the image of these two people standing together, as the marriage starts, so in love. And at the end of this, it tends to be just a mess. Now, not all cases end that way, but boy, there were a lot that were.
Right. I could definitely see that. I mean, what do you think are the biggest mistakes people make before they even file for divorce?
Okay. So one of the things that is a major faux pas is the divorce client who is bent on embarrassing or denigrating their soon to be ex or their ex. What ends up happening, and divorce cases are hard enough to begin with. I mean, social scientists actually did a study of the greatest stressors that you can go through in your life.
Right.
Divorce came in third behind death of a spouse or child and going to jail. That's how stressful.
And I've been through 2 of them, so I can attest to it.
Okay, not the jail part.
Yeah, not the jail part. Yeah. Yeah.
So, having said that, you don't want to make it harder. And embarrassing your spouse, humiliating them is just pushing you down the wrong path. I think about the case in New York New York, involving John and Jenny Paulson. The case started when Jenny read about the divorce in the newspaper.
Not good.
Okay. Like her spouse, according to her, hadn't even told her that he was filing for divorce. And during the course of the case, he did everything wrong. He was involved in another person. He openly flaunted it. He got pregnant with this person. It pushed the case
Hmm.
so badly. And at one point, he offered her millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to settle the case, and she wouldn't settle. And the reason she wouldn't settle is because she was still angry and humiliated.
Right.
And
And I think
so,
I think you bring up a good point because I often coach clients that, the way you start this, if you just serve somebody, right, out of the blue and they have no heads up, you're setting the tone for the divorce in many ways. In
yeah,
some cases, it's absolutely necessary. It's an emergency situation.
right.
Assets are being, spent and squandered and moved.
Um, so this desire for revenge, so to speak, um, I think is related to and pushes the case in a negative, vein. And so a lot of people walk into my office and they say they want to win, quote unquote. They want to win their divorce case. And I keep telling them there is no winning a divorce case. The best you can realize is to finish the case with your sanity, integrity, personal financial resources, and important relationships intact. That's it. It doesn't get better than that. So there's no winning your case, and sensitizing people to that idea, I think, is a major thing. And it's certainly something that I talk about in my book extensively, that, you're not winning your case. And people who start from that premise
Mhm.
are destined to failure.
Right. I
So
think
that's another one.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I think that, you know, for both of us now, as a divorce coach, and I'm glad to see that divorce coaching is getting more respect and more women, especially, are realizing. But I've had some male clients, it's a smart thing to do before I hire an attorney. But we are really the welcome to the family court system for people.
Yes.
People who've been married, living in their own happy world, perhaps, or unhappy, but they have no idea what this world is about, and we are the first ones who are the reality check, right?
Right. Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. And the work that you do as a divorce coach is critically important. Not that attorneys are incapable of empathy, okay, but
Some. Yeah.
th- some are. But to have that advocate who, outside of the arena of the law itself, is able to ground the client to
Mhm.
look at things in a very realistic sense is critically important, because you don't want to be arguing, you know, over a $500 item, when 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 you're spending thousands of dollars. So that's an important thing to also realize. Listen to your attorney, and it goes back, of course. The step before is hire the right attorney. You
Right.
know,
The
but
biggest decision,
listen,
most important decision you make in a divorce.
most important decision you can possibly make. And one of the things that I found in my practice over the course of years, um, is that people tend to hire who they are.
Mm.
So if the client is a studious, non confrontational kind of person who just wants to be practical and get to the end of the case, guess what? That's who she hires or he hires. On the other side of this coin are the what I used to call wise guy masters of the universe,
Oh, I use that
who
term a lot. Masters of the universe. A lot of my clients
masters of
are
the universe.
divorcing those masters.
Yeah. Yeah. So and so where are they? They want to win. They want to grind the other side into the ground. And that goes back to that whole notion about I have to win my case. But in the context of hiring an attorney, if you're the practical, non-confrontational person, guess what? If you hire that person and they come up against Attila the Hun on the other side, they're not going to do well. So, the most important question that a client can ask that attorney or assess is, are they capable of dealing with your spouse? That's what you want to focus on. Can that person handle my spouse and whoever they hire? And that's a critical, judgment call that affects the rest of the case, frankly.
I agree with
So
you 100%, Ron. I say this on the daily to the women I'm talking to because I say to them, I want to get to know your spouse. And that may sound weird, but what it means is I need to know what makes them tick,
right,
how they are likely to react in
right,
this divorce as it plays out. And sometimes I have women come to me and say, oh, Susie at the gym told me I should hire, Barbara Smith, and she was great for her. She could have had a totally different type of
right,
divorce, divorcing someone different, and is not up to the task to dealing
right.
with a high conflict person who has hired, a barracuda type attorney, right?
Yeah,
And has this like scorched earth strategy. So I think that is really, really important. Not every divorce attorney is the same. Some are great at mediation and collaborative. That's wonderful if that's possible, but some are not.
yeah.
Set for a conflict like this, right?
Yes. And the other important question for someone to use to assess whether this is the right person is the question, if this case doesn't settle, and I hope it does, but if it doesn't settle, are you going to be the person that comes to court with me for trial?
Hmm.
Because a lot of attorneys, believe it or not, don't feel comfortable in the courtroom, don't want to go to the courtroom. They want to settle their case, but if they don't settle, they're not the person you want standing next to you in the battle, you know? And so that's an important one because if you pick the wrong attorney and that attorney ends up turning the case over to someone else to try, you're doubling the cost of the case, doubling because they have to relearn the case.
Right.
Now, you
Right, and
know,
that's why, I think collaborative is a wonderful process when it's possible, but I have to educate people that, you
yeah.
know, don't use your favorite bulldog attorney for collaborative because
Yes.
they signed
Yes.
something, and if that falls apart, and I've seen it fall apart with several
Yes.
clients, they can't represent you in court. So save your favorite litigator in the background as the plan B. So that's strategic. That's what I think, I as a divorce coach work on with people because they rush into this process not knowing any of these things, right?
Yeah. Yes. So, two more things that I think are also important and major mistakes that clients tend to make. One is this whole area of spying on your spouse to gather information, documents, records, etc. This is a landmine. Now, you mentioned I practiced in New York, and so the laws across the various jurisdictions are somewhat different. But if you're engaged in improper eavesdropping, if you're improperly going into someone's computer or cell phone or secretly recording them, those kinds of activities can become landmines. And there's a famous case going on right now involving John and Laura Overdeck. He is a major player and part owner of a hedge fund. There's over 6 billion with a B dollars at stake in this case. In the early phases, she improperly accessed his computer, started to see emails between his attorney and this gentleman. She did other things, of improper nature and spying on her. And guess what? The court has just ruled that she can't produce any expert testimony, any evidence on her behalf.
Wow.
It's a path where the husband gets up on the stand and testifies to whatever he wants to testify, and you can cross-examine him, but you can't put in your own proof. She has effectively deep sixed her case.
Mm.
And by the way, he offered her 600 or 700 million dollars to settle the case. And she said, No, absolutely not.
I would have
Now,
taken that, Ron.
please insult me the same way.
Yeah.
Offer me 6 or 700 million dollars.
But I think this
Uh,
goes back to something you were saying earlier, that emotions are powerful and they can cloud
uh,
your judgment, right? I had a client the other day who we were talking about this issue of, and look, I've been there where you feel betrayed, you want evidence. Here's the
right,
reality: the courts usually don't care, right? Who's
right,
cheating on who, and right,
right.
unless it affects the children. And even then, it's hard to prove, right? But so you're doing all of this, you're spending all of this, you're putting yourself in this vulnerable situation, and there's not going to be that dramatic smoking gun moment we see on TV shows in court where you show,
Yes,
your husband walking out of a motel with his secretary, right?
yeah, yeah, yes, yeah. No, absolutely true. It's the temptation is great. Okay, and especially when you see your soon-to-be ex involved in all kinds of what you think is improper activity, hiding money, setting up trusts that, are aimed at defeating the equitable distribution of the assets. The temptation is great, but this is where you need to kind of like have a frank and open conversation with your attorney and be guided by what that attorney says are the limits of what you can do and can't do. Because you don't want to be in the position of this woman who's basically been precluded from offering testimony. And related to this is another thing. You don't want to involve the IRS in your case.
Mm,
Let me tell you what I mean by that. I can't tell you the number of people who come into my office and in the privacy of that attorney client, relationship, talk about the fact that there's unreported income, there's cash, there's this, there's that. Number one, you're putting your attorney in an impossible situation.
right.
In New York, by the way, we have a rule that says that attorneys must certify as accurate the financial statements of their clients. So when the client tells you about the cash or the unreported income, I can no longer certify my client's financial statement if it's not reported on that. So that's number one.
Right.
Okay. But there's a greater danger. And here's the greater danger. Clients come in, they're angry, they're beside themselves. He's getting away with everything, whatever the mantra is. And so they say to me, you know what? Let's tell the judge about all the cash and the unreported income. Okay. Excuse me. You can do that when you're prepared to share the adjoining jail cell.
Right.
Okay.
Good point.
Because
Yeah.
in most instances, there are joint tax returns.
Hmm.
The only way you're getting out from underneath the IRS is if you qualify as innocent spouse. I
I was
didn't
just
know. I
going to
didn't
say
have
that
reason.
it's hard to prove, right? And
And
then
it's
you're basically trying to prove that you had no knowledge of what was going on. You're almost coerced
right,
to sign.
right. Exactly. Exactly. And it's an almost impossible burden as you're talking about. And the result of it is one of two possibilities. You know, the judge now says, well, that's interesting now that I know about this unreported income. And they ask the IRS agent to sit in the courtroom during your case, right? So what ends up happening is either the assets of the marriage are now going to be taken by the IRS to pay for unreported income, or they're going to jail the guilty party. And if it's the husband, let's say, who has to now pay support, guess what? He's not in a
Exactly.
position to pay support anymore.
Right, right.
And
You're biting the hand that feeds you.
and P.S. New York says, oh, by the way, while you're in jail, we're going to suspend that payment.
Wow.
So I it is a
Disaster.
path
I
that's
have
fraught
to
with
say, while
danger.
we're talking about this, Ron, that it is uncanny how many of my clients' spouses are doing some sort of shady dealing. It's like they are often very successful in finance, hedge funds, you name it,
Yeah.
right? A lot of finance people. But they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. There are loans taken out. There's
Yes.
tax debt. There's this lifestyle they're trying to live up to, and they're sacrificing their stability for it, right? And then when the divorce happens and that that spouse is able to peek behind the curtain, it is frightening. Um, s- to your point, and their first thought is like, "Oh my gosh, we're in trouble with the IRS. What are we going to do?"
Yes.
But that's
Yes.
not the way to do it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think women tend to underestimate the most when they're preparing to leave a marriage? I mean, are there things that women don't think about when they're preparing to leave?
Yeah. Um, it's changing. This, what I'm about to talk about, is changing somewhat. But for a long time, a lot of the women who came into my office weren't financially savvy in even knowing the beginnings
Mm,
of what they actually owned, where assets were, what insurance policies and wills were in place, all of those things. And so I'd go through my normal litany of trying to find out in the consultation, well, what assets do you have? And they were incapable of telling me. They said, well, we have some checking accounts, savings account, investment accounts. Well, how much are they worth? I don't know.
mhm.
So putting yourself, if you see that path ahead of you, making sure that you get the information, making sure you have the tax returns, making sure that you have a sense of what investments you have, where are they located, what's the title of these assets, doing the financial due diligence, if you will, is so important walking into this case.
Right, and
Uh,
that's the first thing I talk to them about, one of the first things, right? And I think that in some cases they are able to get copies, and I work with them on creative ways to get access to this information, but in this digital age of, you try to get into an account and your spouse gets all these alerts, that's challenging. And I think when there's financial abuse and these women, for example, are stay at home and they've been kept in
right,
the dark purposely to keep them under control, it's hard to get access, right? Then we get into discovery. Then we hope that they are honest on their financial affidavit, which they're not always, as we know, right? So
right,
that's where,
right.
it becomes challenging. But yes, anytime you can plan ahead, I think. And I'm also wondering, Ron, can you tell early on which divorce cases are going to involve a high conflict spouse? And I put it that way because I don't like to use the term high conflict divorce because I often think it's one spouse that's making the problem and the other just wants to
Yeah.
get divorced.
Yeah. Yes, you after spending 15, 20 minutes with the person, I usually have a pretty good idea where this case is going.
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. This really bright, wonderful woman client of mine came into my office for a consultation, and well educated, college grad, master's degrees, everything, you know. So I start talking to her, and she says to me during the consultation, he's a little bit controlling. I said, okay, give me an example of controlling. What does that mean? She says, well, like when I go shopping for clothing, he comes with me and he picks out the items that I can buy and the colors he likes. And when I come home from shopping, he looks at the receipt from the grocery store to see if I've taken advantage of all of the sales. The person now goes on to tell me that once he made her return a 5-pound bag of potatoes because the other store had it for 39 cents less. Now, that day, I knew two things. Number one, this case is not going easy. Okay. And number two, if he had a problem with the 39 cents, he's going to have a major problem with the millions of dollars in assets that he's going to be asked to divide. And sure enough, that case went to trial for 2 months. and it involved a Morgan Stanley master of the universe, okay, who was called to task and made to, pay millions of dollars to the spouse. But yes, usually as soon as I start hearing, the client talking about what life is like under this regime, you know,
Absolutely. And it is a
y-
regime in some cases. And I wish I could say that the grocery store story was shocking, but I've had clients have similar situations. One, they have 3 homes and she got in trouble for buying 2 boxes of the same item. I mean,
yeah,
come
yeah.
on. I mean,
The,
that is coercive control.
the cherry on the top of this case is in the first consultation, as she's telling me this story about the potatoes, I'm saying to myself, when I try this case, because I knew it was going to trial, the first thing I'm bringing out through her and her testimony is the story about the potatoes. Okay.
Potato
The
gate. Yes.
judge, the judge wrote a 70-page decision. Page one, footnote one, story about the potatoes. All right. So,
I'm
you know,
impressed that the judge, noticed and clued into this. I think more and more have to, I hope it's changing.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and that brings me to the question after decades in family court. I mean, what parts of the system do you think work well and where does it fail families? I mean, I've written about where I see some of the
right,
failures and the
yeah,
misogynistic tropes that are rampant.
right. I mean, I tend to come from the point of view that what judges often get right are the areas of equitable distribution, dividing up the assets. You know, um, they used to be much better at valuing assets themselves in the sense of understanding the expert testimony and really getting into things, but they're good on division of assets. They're usually pretty good on spousal support. They're usually pretty good on child support, both of which in New York, spousal support and child support, are formulas that are usually applied. The areas where judges really struggle, attorneys struggle, clients struggle, custody and access.
Mhm.
Just, you know, first of all, judges have no particular skill or training in deciding who's the best parent to parent this child going forward. There's no metric that we can use to determine which parent is actually, going to be better. And it's turned into this kind of battle of the forensic expert who comes in and does a forensic evaluation of the family. um you know they're no better equipped than anybody else is to
Oh, I know. I
determine
mean,
who's
look
the
at the
best parent.
stories in our book, right? And it's expensive. I mean, you're paying for all
uh,
of these
uh,
guardian ad litem. I had a client the other day who said, "Well, my attorney said we could get a GAL," and I was like, "No, like really, that is." Unless it's absolutely necessary, I
right,
don't see that helping the case. It usually drags on longer. It's more acrimonious. It's putting the children through a lot. It's hard to find a good GAL too. I mean, I think there needs to be more training all around in trauma and child psychology, right? And
right,
coercive control is getting more attention as a term, but
yes,
getting judges to be educated in that. I know that many of them come from a whole different world. They don't want nobody wants family court. No one
you
says
know
send me to family court.
tongue in cheek, I say in my book, the judge in the matrimonial or family court didn't get there because they scored the highest on the judge's exam.
Mm,
They come to that courtroom with their own biases, prejudices. They have their own divorces that they've gone through, or their daughter or son got divorced, and there was
right,
and so it is a very, very difficult area to practice in, and certainly for the clients, to get to the end as a whole person able to go on with your life.
right. I just want to, wrap up these questions with saying that I actually quote you often to clients because I remember you saying once that the biggest determining factor in a divorce is who you're divorcing and who they hire, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, that
Yeah.
determines, someone asked me yesterday, how long will this take? Probably. I have no way of knowing. I need to know who your spouse is a lot more. I need to see who they hire, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, all great information, Ron. Thank you so much. I want to move on to this truth or trap segment I have
Okay.
here, right? So, are you
Are,
ready for this? This is where
I don't know. Are you trapping me?
no, no, you just have to tell me whether this
Okay.
is a truth or trap. I'm going to throw out a
Okay.
statement that's, a common assumption. And I think you may have touched
Okay.
on this one a little bit, but let's talk more about it.
Okay.
Being completely honest with your divorce attorney can sometimes hurt your case.
Absolutely true. Um,
You talked about the
criminal.
taxes, but where else is it true?
Okay. So, criminal law attorneys frequently don't ask their clients, did you do this?
Mhm.
They don't want to know the answer to that. In the same way, being perfectly wonderfully honest with your divorce attorney can create problems. Now, this is a difficult thing for me to say because we want to encourage honesty in the relationship. But I'm also aware of this other twist, which is if the client says, listen, I've had a really difficult time and there were times that I considered suicide, or in the context of this terrible marriage, I used drugs. Um, well, when you reveal that, if a case now involves custody and visitation,
Mhm.
once the client has told the attorney about these circumstances, the attorney can no longer put in to the courthouse any um, claims, any statements of the client which are contrary to what the client told him.
Right.
And so I can't certify as accurate their statements again, you know. Or the client now can't say, I never considered suicide.
Right.
Um, it, it, it just, I'll tell you, we talked about, the tax person and the like. A guy once came in and told me, my wife doesn't know about my bank account in the Cayman Islands. I said, well, she does now. And he says, you can't reveal that. You're bound by attorney client privilege. I said, absolutely. I can't reveal it. But if you put into the courthouse a financial statement, I have to certify it. You
Right.
don't list those Cayman accounts. I'm not certifying it. I don't certify it. Guess what? The judge doesn't believe it at all.
Right. Right.
So,
But that's a
as I
common thing
said,
I see. That's part of the abuser's playbook that we put at the bottom of the book I co-authored is
yeah,
hiding money, right?
yeah,
Offshore accounts, like giving it
yeah,
to family, not being truthful on your financial statement. And that's why I often tell women, even if you've been kept in the dark, if you remember, hey, there was this, Fidelity account, or we had this
right.
Vanguard investment, whatever it was, if you could just remember that so that when you see this, you can say to your attorney, this does not look right. This does not add
Right.
up. He had a pension from the old job. That's not
Yes,
right. Like
yes,
any little bit of information is helpful to your attorney, right?
yes, yes. But going back to what we were talking about, it's almost like a client comes in and you can see that they're really struggling, and you want to say go to therapy, right?
Or a coach.
Or talk to a divorce coach.
Yeah.
But I then need to say to them, be careful what you tell them.
Right, right.
Because if you now tell the therapist about these things, guess what? In the divorce case, the therapist and the notes could be discoverable.
Right, right. And they're a mandated reporter, right? If there's
Right.
any
Now,
abuse
the one
claims
thing,
of children.
the one thing for you as a divorce coach is this: there's the doctor-patient privilege. Well, in New York, they define what a doctor is. Okay, it doesn't include divorce coaches.
Right, right.
You know,
Yes.
so I don't know. somebody comes in and says, to you, reveals something that you don't want out there, are you now subject to being called as a witness to have to testify to this? So, boy, there are lots of traps out there for the unwary. And part of the whole reason I wrote this book is to make people aware of just these kinds of things so that when they walk into the office to hire somebody, they have, a better idea of how to interact with that person.
Yeah, no, thank you for writing the book. And I have a short letter from a listener, someone in my support group. Okay. She says, "Dear Amy and Ron, my husband keeps telling me that he'll, quote, destroy me in court if I leave, and that his lawyer will make sure I walk away with nothing. I know some of this may be intimidation, but it's working. I'm scared to even start the process. After all your years in family law, how seriously should someone take threats like these?" Michelle.
Very seriously. Because what it means is not that he's going to be, it's possible for him to achieve these results, but he's already signaling that this case is going to be disaster. When you start with that premise, that person now needs a special type of attorney, someone who can stand up in the courtroom and be the strong advocate that she needs in order to deal with this. So don't be sucked into the he's all powerful and he
Right.
and his attorney will achieve that goal. Tap into I need a champion on my side who can
Exactly,
deflect this.
exactly. I just had a consultation with a woman yesterday who said this same exact thing, and I said what you said, is that, "Okay, you've got a plan in silence, right? Don't go rushing up to him and say, 'I'm hiring an attorney, I'm doing this, I'm
Right.
talking to a divorce coach.' No, 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 right? You're not being manipulative, you're not being a liar or sneaky, you are protecting yourself, and
Yes.
that's what I'm helping them to do. I think it look, he's telling you right away what it's going to be like. But they
Right.
do that to keep you under control and keep you scared to
Absolutely.
leave.
Absolutely. And it's a very common pattern dealing with narcissistic spouses.
Right.
Okay. But as I always tell, and you just made this point wonderfully. When I play poker, I hold the cards like this. I don't hold them like this,
Hmm.
where I show exactly what I have, what I'm doing, what I'm thinking about. You have to be very circumspect about what you say. And it's tough because you really want to respond. You really
Right.
want to
It's
say,
something you're still living with this person often.
absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
challenging. So that's what I work with people on, is keeping things under control. And
Yes.
it's a chess game. You can't be playing checkers when they're playing chess, right, Ron?
Yeah,
And I think that's
that's
a good place for us to
good.
end.
Yeah.
Thank you so, so much. I hope everybody gets your book. Everybody, you'll recognize this cover, right? I'll put the information in the show notes. How else can people find you? You have an amazing website, by the way. I love your blog articles. You share so much. I think it's great advice for people.
Thank you. I have a website and you can find it at www.divorced with a D on the end of it, divorced ever after, all one word. So if you just type in divorced ever after, my website will come up. And what I try to do is in that blog, share interesting cases and also talk about the kinds of issues that we've been talking about to help people navigate through this incredibly difficult experience in their lives. And
But you can get through it. You've seen people on the other side, right? And I
I,
know that every family law attorney I know, retired and still active, you know, gets emails or runs into one somewhere and sees that there is life after divorce, right?
absolutely, absolutely, and that's the last chapter of my book. When I talk about coming out on the other side, and yes, there is hope, and there is an ability to go on with your life and make it better than it was. So and I applaud you for the work that you do in helping attorneys be as effective as they can be on behalf of their clients.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you for being open to divorce coaching. I mean, some attorneys don't like us or are threatened a little bit. I think, they think we're going to try to take over the case. That's not our role. And so I thank you for appreciating that. I think we're a team. Everybody
Yes,
needs a team, so ladies, you may think, oh my gosh, do I need a financial person? Do I need a coach? This will pay dividends for you in the future, right? Is that you don't want to end up back in court as I have and many of my clients have. So take Ron's advice today. Thank you so much for being with
you're
us.
welcome, Amy. A pleasure talking to you today.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening to Girl Wake Up. I'm your host, Amy Polacco. If this episode woke something up in you, don't let it fade. Share it with a friend who needs to hear it, leave a review, and keep this conversation going. Remember, no one's coming to save you, so she did.